Chicago Bears fans, welcome to Bears News fans. And let me tell you something with absolute clarity and force from the very first second of this video. What we witnessed yesterday at Soldier Field was not simply a football game. No, sir. What we saw was a statement of principles, a manifestation of competitive spirit, and irrefutable proof that this Chicago Bears team, coached by Ben Johnson, is fundamentally different from anything we have seen in the last decade with this franchise. Now, allow me to be completely honest with you, because that is what you deserve, and I will never lie to you. This 31-28 victory against the Pittsburgh Steelers should have been impossible. Mathematically, strategically, from any analytical perspective of modern football, the Bears had no right to win that game. And yet here we are, celebrating our fourth consecutive victory, holding a record of 8 wins and 3 losses, and maintaining absolute leadership of the NFC North Division. But before I dive into the 3 explosive pieces of news I have prepared for you today, you need to understand the complete context of what is happening in Chicago, because what comes next is going to shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about this team and its immediate future in this season that has stopped being a rebuild and become a legitimate playoff campaign. The narrative around the Bears during the first 2 weeks of the season was absolutely devastating. The critics, the analysts, the supposed experts from ESPN and all the sports networks across the country buried us week after week. Caleb Williams was labelled a bust. Ben Johnson was questioned for his offensive decisions, and the defense coordinated by Dennis Allen seemed incapable of stopping anyone. But then something changed. Something fundamental transformed inside that locker room at Halas Hall. And over the last 9 weeks, this team has compiled 8 victories against only 1 loss. Let me repeat that so it is absolutely clear. 8 wins in 9 games. That is not luck, ladies and gentlemen. That is not coincidence. That is culture. That is leadership. That is having a head coach who knows exactly how to maximize available talent, regardless of the adverse circumstances that present themselves week after week. And believe me, when I tell you this, the adverse circumstances the Bears faced yesterday were absolutely extraordinary in their severity and potential impact on the final outcome of the contest. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to reflect deeply on this. How many times in the modern history of the NFL have you seen a team win a game without their 3 starting linebackers? How many times have you witnessed a defense completely decimated by injuries that still manages to force 2 crucial turnovers that directly convert into 14 points on the scoreboard? The answer is simple: almost never, because what happened yesterday defies all conventional logic of professional sports. And that leads me directly to the first piece of news of the day, which is absolutely crucial to understanding where we stand as an organization at this precise moment of the 2025 season. So pay very close attention, because what comes next is fundamental. The Chicago Bears defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers by a final score of 31-28 at Soldier Field. And I tell you, without any kind of reservation or doubt, this was the most improbable, most impressive, and most significant victory of the entire season up to this point. And I am not saying that only because of the final result on the scoreboard, but because of the absolutely devastating circumstances under which this team had to compete from the first offensive snap to the last second the game clock showed. Let me paint you the complete picture so you understand the magnitude of what I am saying. The Bears entered that game without Tremaine Edmonds, without TJ Edwards, and without Noah Sewell. Those are their 3 starting linebackers, the 3 players who form the central core of Dennis Allen's defense. The 3 men responsible for stopping the run, covering tight ends, and making critical plays on 3rd and short, all absent. But wait, because the story gets worse. During the course of the game, rookie linebacker Ruben Hippolyte II suffered a shoulder injury that took him out of the contest in the first half. And as if that were not enough punishment from the medical department, cornerback Tyreek Stevenson left injured with a hip issue during the development of the encounter. leaving a secondary that was already operating without Jalen Johnson and without Kyler Gordon, who remain on injured reserve for several weeks now. Now let me pause here, because I need this to be absolutely clear in your minds. This is not a normal injury situation in the NFL. Every team deals with losses during the season. That is an inherent part of professional sport and the war of attrition that represents a 17-game campaign plus playoffs. But what the Bears faced yesterday was something completely different. We are talking about a scenario where literally more than half of your starting defense is watching the game from the bench in street clothes or from their homes in medical recovery. We are talking about players who were signed from practice squads barely days before the game, now being forced to play critical snaps in third down situations against a Pittsburgh team that arrived with a record of 6 wins and 4 losses and legitimate playoff aspirations. And despite all that, despite every imaginable obstacle the universe could have placed in their path, the Bears found a way to win that damn game. And here is where the story becomes truly fascinating from a perspective of organizational development and building winning culture long term. Because the heroes of this victory were not necessarily the established stars of the roster. They were not the names you would expect to see headlining the highlights on SportsCenter or dominating conversations on social media after the game. The heroes were players like DeMarco Jackson and Amen Ogbongbemiga, linebackers that most casual Bears fans probably could not identify in a photograph 3 weeks ago. They were emergency cornerbacks like Nahshon Wright, who intercepted his 5th ball of the season in the first quarter and demonstrated once again why he has become one of the most inspiring stories of the entire year. It was rookie offensive tackle Ozzy Trapilo who received the news just hours before kickoff that he would be starting on the left side of the offensive line, protecting Caleb Williams' blind side after Theo Benedette was ruled out with a quad injury, and proceeded to play the game of his life against one of the most ferocious and talented defenses in the entire American Conference. But let me take this one step further, because there are additional layers in this narrative that need to be explored with analytical depth. The victory against Pittsburgh was not only important because of the circumstances under which it was achieved, but because of what it represents in terms of the historical trajectory of this franchise over the last decades. The Chicago Bears have been synonymous with offensive mediocrity for generations of fans. They have been the recurring joke of the league when it comes to quarterback development and creativity in play design. But Ben Johnson has arrived to change that narrative in a radical and permanent way. His offensive system has allowed Caleb Williams, despite having irregular days in terms of passing accuracy like he had yesterday, to still positively impact the game result through intelligent decisions, mobility in the pocket, and ability to make critical plays in high-pressure moments. Williams connected 3 touchdown passes in the game, including 2 to DJ Moore, who finally seems to be recovering his rhythm after weeks of silent performances that generated concern among fans and analysts who follow the team closely. And here comes something I want to emphasize with particular intensity, because it goes to the very heart of what it means to be a true contender in this competitive and ruthless league. Great teams, teams that make deep runs in January and February, teams that lift the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the season, always find ways to win ugly games. They always discover formulas to overcome adversity when everything seems against them. And that is exactly what the Bears did yesterday. It was not an aesthetic masterpiece. It was not the kind of start-to-finish domination you would want to see when analyzing film on Monday morning. It was a victory built on determination, on roster depth, on exceptional coaching that puts players in positions to succeed regardless of their experience level or status on the official depth chart. And those kinds of victories are the ones that define complete seasons and create memories that last forever in the collective mind of a fan base hungry for success after years of suffering and disappointment. Now, here is the part that has me genuinely excited about the short-term future of this team. The Bears have already accumulated 8 victories in 11 games played. There are 6 games remaining on the regular season calendar. If this team manages to win only 3 of those 6 remaining contests, they would finish with a record of 11 wins and 6 losses, which historically has been more than enough to qualify for the playoffs in most seasons. But I tell you, this team has the potential to do much more than simply qualify for the postseason. This team has the pieces, has the coaching, has the mentality, and increasingly important, has the confidence necessary to compete against any opponent in any scenario. And that confidence does not come from arrogance or empty declarations in press conferences. It comes from having been in the trenches, from having overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable, from having found ways to win when all statistical probabilities said they should lose. That is what builds true contenders in the National Football League. But before we get completely carried away by enthusiasm and optimism generated by this 4-game winning streak, I need to ground your expectations with a dose of reality that is absolutely critical for your complete understanding of the team's current situation. Because while we celebrate this improbable victory, while we enjoy the division lead, while we dream about playoff scenarios, there are serious problems developing behind the scenes that could endanger everything we have built during these last magical weeks. And that leads me directly to the second piece of news of the day, which is potentially devastating in its implications for the next crucial weeks of the season. On Saturday afternoon, the Chicago Bears officially announced they have placed starting linebacker Tremaine Edmunds on injured reserve due to a groin injury he suffered during the final defensive series of last week's victory against the Minnesota Vikings. And I tell you with absolute clarity and without any kind of filters or attempts to soften the blow, this is bad news of catastrophic proportions for the immediate aspirations of this team. Tremaine Edmunds is not simply another player on the roster. He is not a marginal contributor who can be easily replaced by the next man on the depth chart without significant loss of production or effectiveness. We are talking about the second best interceptor on the team with 4 interceptions on the season, tied in that category only with star cornerback Jalen Johnson, who is also out with injury. We are talking about the team's leading tackler, the man responsible for directing the defense on the field, the primary communicator who ensures everyone is aligned correctly before each snap. And here is the part that really hurts when you analyze the specific details of the situation. Edmunds will be out for a minimum of 4 games due to injured reserve rules, but sources within the organization who have had access to medical information suggest that the real recovery timeline will likely extend between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on how his body responds to treatment and rehabilitation. That means, in the most optimistic possible scenario, Tremaine Edmunds could return for the Week 16 game against the Green Bay Packers on December 20th. But in a more realistic and probably conservative scenario from a medical perspective, we might not see Edmunds back on the field until the playoffs. Assuming, of course, that the Bears manage to qualify for the postseason, which is no longer an absolute guarantee given the complications I am about to explain to you in meticulous detail. Now let me break down exactly what this loss means in practical terms of defensive schemes and tactical capabilities for coordinator Dennis Allen. When you lose your middle linebacker, you are not simply losing one physical player on the field. You are losing the brain of your defense. You are losing the guy who makes real-time adjustments when he identifies specific offensive formations or tendencies in the opponent's hurry-up game. You are losing experience, veteran presence, instincts developed over years of competition at the highest level of professional football. And when you combine the absence of Edmunds with the simultaneous absences of TJ Edwards, who has already missed 6 games this season due to a combination of hand surgery and persistent hamstring issues, and Noah Sewell, who is out with an elbow injury, suddenly you find yourself in a situation where you are operating with your 4th, 5th, and even 6th linebackers on the depth chart playing roles they simply were not prepared for when they arrived at training camp in July. But here is where the narrative gets even more complicated and where I need you to pay maximum attention, because this is critical. The next weeks on the calendar are not easy games against weak opponents that allow margin for errors or mediocre performances. The next game is Thursday night against the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that currently shares the best record in the entire National Conference, along with the Detroit Lions. A team with a devastating offence, led by Jalen Hurts and an arsenal of offensive weapons that includes A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. A primetime game in national broadcast where the entire country will be watching to determine if the Bears are legitimate contenders or simply a surprise team that will eventually be exposed by elite competition. And you are going to face that opponent with a defence that is literally held together by duct tape and prayers at this moment. And let me take this even deeper in terms of historical context analysis and comparisons with similar situations we have seen develop in previous seasons around the league. In the year 2019, the San Francisco 49ers reached the Super Bowl despite suffering significant injuries in their linebacker core during the second half of the season. But the crucial difference is that the 49ers had a dominant defensive line with Nick Bosa, DeForest Buckner, and Arik Armstead that could generate constant pressure and collapse protection pockets without needing to send complicated blitzes that left linebackers vulnerable in coverage. The Bears have a good pass rush with Montez Sweat, who forced another crucial strip sack yesterday against Pittsburgh, but they do not have that level of consistent dominance that allows the defensive scheme to completely compensate for deficiencies in the second level of the defense. That means Dennis Allen is going to have to be extremely creative with his designs, is going to have to rely on zone coverage schemes that minimize individual responsibilities of inexperienced players, and is going to have to pray that the secondary can hold their assignments long enough to allow pressure to reach the opposing quarterback. And here is something that nobody is discussing in mainstream media, but that I consider absolutely fundamental to understanding the complete ramifications of this situation. The loss of Edmonds not only impacts the defense on the field during games, it impacts preparation throughout the entire practice week. It impacts the coaching staff's ability to implement complex defensive packages because they cannot trust that players with limited experience will absorb and correctly execute those concepts under the pressure of real game situations. That means simplifying the playbook, reducing the variety of looks you can show the opponent, and eventually becoming more predictable for intelligent offensive coordinators who are going to study the film and exploit those limitations without mercy or remorse. Now, is there hope in the midst of this seemingly bleak landscape? Of course there is! The Bears demonstrated yesterday that they have depth on the roster that many teams around the league simply do not possess. Ryan Poles has done an exceptional job building that roster with hungry players who are willing to take advantage of any opportunity presented to them. Ben Johnson has shown he can adapt his offensive philosophy to keep the team competitive even when the defense is bleeding points. And more important than anything else, this team has developed a winning mentality that is not intimidated by adversity or difficult circumstances. But I am not going to lie to you and tell you that the loss of Tremaine Edmonds does not matter, or that it can be easily overcome. This is a severe blow that is going to require significant adjustments and exceptional contributions from players throughout the roster if we want to maintain this level of success during the next crucial weeks. And as if losing Tremaine Edmonds were not enough drama to process in a single weekend, there is another story developing that has fascinating implications for the future of this defense, and that is generating intense debates among fans and analysts about what is the correct decision to maximize available talent. And that leads me to the third and final piece of news of the day, which involves a dilemma that head coach Ben Johnson probably never anticipated having to confront when the season began 3 months ago. Nahshon Wright has created a problem for Ben Johnson. And I want to be absolutely clear about something from the beginning of this segment, because words matter and context is crucial. This is the best kind of problem a head coach can have. This is the type of dilemma that winning teams face when they have too much talent competing for limited positions on the field. This is exactly the scenario you want to see develop when you are building a sustainably successful organization. But that does not mean the decision is easy or that there is an obvious answer that satisfies all parties involved in the situation. Let me explain exactly what is happening and why this is so complicated from multiple different perspectives. Nahshon Wright was a cornerback that most Chicago Bears fans did not even have on their radar when the season began. He was a depth player, an additional body on the roster you hoped you would never have to see on the field except in garbage time situations or during the preseason. But then injuries began to accumulate in the secondary. Jalen Johnson, the team's #1 cornerback and one of the best corners in the entire NFL, suffered an injury that has kept him out for weeks. Kyler Gordon, another established starter, also ended up on injured reserve. And suddenly, Nahshon Wright found himself being thrown into the fire, being forced to play significant snaps against elite receivers on some of the most explosive offenses in the league. And you know what he has done? He has responded in an absolutely spectacular manner. Over the last 4 weeks, Nahshon Wright has intercepted 5 passes. 5. Let me put that in perspective for you. There are all-pro cornerbacks in this league who do not intercept 5 passes in complete seasons. There are corners who signed contracts for $50 or $60 million who have not made 5 interceptions in the last 2 years combined. And here you have a player that basically nobody knew a month ago, making winning plays week after week after week. His interception in the first quarter against Pittsburgh yesterday directly set up a touchdown that gave the Bears initial momentum and established the tone for the rest of the game. His instinct for the ball, his ability to track deep passes, his willingness to be physical at the line of scrimmage against bigger receivers, all of that has been absolutely exceptional and far beyond any reasonable expectations anyone could have had when he was forced into that role by necessity just a few weeks ago. Now here is the dilemma keeping Ben Johnson awake at night. Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon are close to returning from their respective injuries. Reports suggest both could be available for the Philadelphia game on Thursday, or at the latest for the following week. And when they return, in theory, they should recover their positions as starters because they are more established players with more experience, with bigger contracts that reflect their perceived value to the organization. But how the hell do you take Nahshon Wright off the field right now? How do you tell a player who just intercepted 5 passes in 4 games that he is going to return to the bench because the veterans are healthy again? How do you justify that decision, not only to Wright himself, but to the rest of the locker room that has seen with their own eyes the tangible contributions he has made to these 4 consecutive victories? And here is where things get truly fascinating from a locker room dynamics and applied sports psychology perspective. Because this is not just a decision about who is technically better in coverage or who has better athletic ability in terms of speed and agility. This is about sending messages to your team about what you value as an organization. If you automatically replace Wright when the veterans return, you are telling the roster that status matters more than production. You are telling young players that no matter how well they play when they receive their opportunity, they will eventually be relegated back to secondary roles when the designated starters are available again. And that can be poisonous to the culture you are trying to build, especially when that culture is founded on concepts of meritocracy and daily competition in practices. But on the other hand, there are also legitimate arguments for not simply handing Wright the starting job permanently just because he has had an excellent month. Jalen Johnson is an elite cornerback who has demonstrated his ability to neutralize the best receivers in the league for complete seasons, not just during small samples of 4 or 5 games. Kyler Gordon, when healthy, is one of the most promising young cornerbacks in the entire conference, with a development ceiling that probably is higher than Wright's given his pedigree as a higher draft pick and his superior athletic profile. So from a perspective purely of maximizing talent long term, you could argue the correct decision is eventually to transition Wright back to a rotation role while maintaining Johnson and Gordon as your primary corners who play the majority of snaps in critical situations. And let me add another layer of complexity to this situation that is flying completely under the radar in public discussions, but is absolutely crucial when you think about strategic ramifications. The Bears are going to play 2 games in a span of 5 days, with the Philadelphia encounter on Thursday after having played yesterday Sunday against Pittsburgh. That is an extremely quick turnaround that puts tremendous physical stress on players' bodies and significantly increases injury risk due to accumulated fatigue and insufficient recovery between competitions. In that context, having depth at the cornerback position is not a luxury, it is an absolute necessity. You need to be able to rotate fresh players, especially in the secondary, where you are running backwards on most plays and where mental fatigue can lead to costly errors in route recognition or communication in zone coverages. So what is the correct answer? Honestly, I do not know if there is one correct answer that is objectively superior to all other alternatives. Ben Johnson has publicly suggested that Wright definitely is going to maintain a significant role even when Johnson and Gordon return, which is the correct diplomatic statement that avoids creating unnecessary controversy or media drama. But the reality of how snaps are distributed in the Philadelphia game and in subsequent weeks is going to reveal a lot about Johnson's philosophy regarding these situations and about what values he prioritizes when making difficult personnel decisions. My instinct tells me we are probably going to see some kind of 3 cornerback rotation system where everyone receives substantial playing time depending on the offensive packages they face and specific game situations. But that is going to require exceptional communication and ego management from the coaching staff to ensure everyone involved understands their roles and remains committed to the collective success of the team above individual considerations. And here is what I find most inspiring about this entire situation when I take a step back and look at the big picture. Just 1 year ago, the Chicago Bears did not have these kinds of problems because they did not have this kind of depth. They did not have multiple cornerbacks playing at starter level competing for positions. They did not have young players emerging from obscurity to make impactful contributions when called upon by necessity. They did not have a head coach with the confidence and vision to make difficult decisions based on current production, instead of simply defaulting to the established hierarchy of the depth chart. The fact that we are having this conversation, the fact that this is a real dilemma requiring careful consideration instead of an obvious decision, is tangible evidence of the progress this organization has made in an extraordinarily short period of time under the new regime of Johnson and Poles. And now let me speak directly to you, loyal Chicago Bears fans who have invested your precious time in watching this complete video and absorbing all this critical information about the current state of our team. If you have made it to this point in the video, that tells me you are the kind of serious fan who genuinely cares about understanding the deep nuances of what is happening with this franchise. You are not casual fans who only show up when the team is winning and disappear when things get difficult. You are the kind of fan who deserves to have access to quality analysis that goes beyond superficial headlines and empty hot takes that dominate modern sports discourse. So here is what I need you to do right now if you have not already done so. Press that red subscribe button because I guarantee you the next weeks are going to be filled with drama, controversy, incredible plays, and critical decisions that will determine whether this magical season continues its upward trajectory or if we eventually crash against the reality of our limitations. You are going to want to be here with me every day as I navigate each development, as I analyze each coaching decision, as I celebrate each victory and process each defeat if they happen to occur in this final stretch of the season. Also, activate notifications by hitting that bell because I upload new content daily and you do not want to miss a single video when explosive news inevitably emerges. And please, share this content with other Bears fans in your lives who could benefit from the level of deep analysis they will not find anywhere else in the sports media ecosystem. The bigger this community grows, the more resources I can invest in bringing you the best possible content, including potential access to exclusive interviews, live coverage from Harless Hall, and detailed film analysis that really dives into the X's and O's of the game. The next weeks are going to define this season, The Philadelphia game on Thursday is absolutely crucial. The December stretch that includes matchups against Green Bay, potentially Detroit again, and other playoff contenders is going to separate pretenders from real contenders. And I am going to be here every step of the way, providing you the context, the analysis, and the passion you deserve as the best fan base in all of professional sports. Bear down, and I will see you in the next video, where I am going to be breaking down everything you need to know before that massive primetime showdown against the Eagles. This is our season! This is our moment! And together, we are going to enjoy every second of this journey toward the playoffs and beyond.